The machine had been dead for 9 days when they brought in the man with the laptop, and Maggie Dunn knew before he opened his mouth that he was going to say a number with a lot of zeros in it. You learned to read them, the company men. The good shoes that had never been near a wet plant room. The way they set the laptop bag down like it contained something more important than tools. Grant Foley had a lanyard with the Castellan logo on it, and a smile he kept switched on at a low, steady wattage. And he stood in the doorway of the MRI suite at Glenmore County Medical Center, looking at the dead scanner. The way a surgeon looks at a patient who isn't going to make it but whose family can still be billed. "So this is our patient," he said, which was the kind of thing these people said and which made Maggie's teeth hurt. Sharon Vogel had walked him down herself. Sharon was the new CEO, 3 months in, hired off a turnaround at a hospital 2 states over, and she'd come to Glenmore with the particular energy of someone who'd read the books about saving rural hospitals and intended to apply them whether the hospital liked it or not. She wore a blazer in a building where most people wore scrubs, and she introduced Foley to Dr. Naomi Shaw, the radiologist, and to the chief nursing officer, and to a man from finance, and she did not introduce him to Maggie, who was standing 4 feet away in her work shirt with DUNN stitched over the pocket. That was fine. Maggie was used to being the part of the room that didn't get introduced. "Walk me through it," Foley said, and Dr. Shaw, who had been carrying the weight of 9 days of canceled scans, did. 9 days. In a county this size, with the next MRI 110 miles away over a mountain pass that iced up by October, 9 days was a number with its own zeros. Shaw rattled off what 9 days meant in human terms: the stroke workups sent by ambulance to the city, the cancer patients whose staging scans were slipping, the kid with the back injury whose family had already missed 2 work shifts driving him to appointments that got bumped. Foley nodded along, sympathetic at the low, steady wattage, and plugged his laptop into a port on the scanner's electronics cabinet that Maggie wasn't allowed to touch. That was the thing nobody in the room found strange except her. The hospital owned the machine, had paid $2 million for it 6 years back, out of a bond issue the whole county had voted on. But the service contract with Castellan meant that the diagnostic software, the part that could actually tell you what was wrong inside it, was locked. Maggie could change a light bulb in the suite. She could not see what her own hospital's machine was thinking. For that you had to wait 9 days and pay a man in good shoes to plug in a laptop. Only he had the password to. Foley said, watching code scroll. Yeah, he had a way of making small noises that suggested terrible news being bravely withheld. Okay, so. He turned the laptop slightly toward Sharon, not toward Shaw, never toward Maggie, and showed her a screen full of numbers that meant nothing to her and that he had no intention of explaining. Here's what we're looking at. What they were looking at, he said, was the gradient chain. The gradient amplifier and very possibly the gradient coil itself, the big copper andresin assembly buried in the heart of the magnet, were showing fault signatures consistent with degradation. It was, he said, a known wear pattern on machines of this generation. Nobody's fault, just age. How much, Sharon said. She was direct Sharon, Maggie would give her that. Foley did the thing where he sucked air through his teeth. To repair the gradient chain, and I want to be straight with you, on a machine this age there's no guarantee the repair holds, you're looking at around $500,000. Parts, labor, the coil if it comes to that, the recalibration. He let it land. Which is why, honestly, my recommendation, and I'd be saying this to my own mother's hospital, is that you don't put $500,000 into a 6-year-old machine. You look at a replacement. We have a managed service program now. You're not buying a machine. You're buying uptime, guaranteed. We own the maintenance. You never get a surprise like this again. Newer counties than this one are going that way. And that costs. It's a lease. So it's operational, not capital, which your board's going to like. Call it $190 a month, all in, 10-year term. Maggie did the arithmetic in her head before Sharon's finance man did it on his phone. $190,000 a month was $22 million over the term, for a machine that cost $2 million to buy. She didn't say anything. She'd learned that the hard way too. But she'd been standing close enough to the cabinet to see one of the numbers before Foley angled the screen away, and the number had been a temperature, and the temperature had been wrong in a way that had nothing to do with a gradient coil. Maggie Dunn had fixed her first piece of medical equipment in a tent in Kandahar province when she was 23, and the thing she'd fixed had been keeping a man's chest from filling with fluid, and she'd fixed it with a spare part she'd machined out of a different broken machine, because the supply chain was 4,000 miles away and didn't care. The Army had made her a biomedical equipment technician because she'd scored high on the electronics aptitude, and because somebody had to, and it turned out she was the kind of person the work had been waiting for. She could hold a system's whole logic in her head. She could feel where the trouble was the way some people feel weather in a bad knee. She'd kept field hospitals running on improvisation and stubbornness for 2 tours, and when she came home, she'd assumed that skill would be worth something. It was worth $18 an hour at Glenmore County, as it turned out, which was the only biome job within driving distance of her mother, who watched Bertie while Maggie worked. Bertie was 8 and gap-toothed and convinced her mother could fix anything, a belief Maggie worked hard to deserve and harder to never, ever lean on out loud. The job was technically facilities and biomedical technician, which meant Maggie kept 400 pieces of equipment alive: infusion pumps, ventilators, the lab analyzers, the ultrasound carts, the autoclaves, the whole nervous system of a small hospital, with a parts budget that wouldn't have covered the catering at one of Castellan's sales conferences. She was good at it. She was so good at it that nobody noticed she was doing it, which is the curse of people who are good at keeping things from breaking. You only get noticed when you fail. Prevention is invisible. She'd made her peace with that mostly. The MRI was the one machine she wasn't allowed to touch. Castellan's contract drew a bright line around it. Open the electronics cabinet, the contract said, and you void everything. Only certified Castellan engineers may service the system. So for 6 years, Maggie had walked past the most interesting machine in the building every day and kept her hands off it like a kid told not to touch the stove, and she'd resented it the way you resent any fence built to keep you stupid. She knew more about that machine than the contract wanted her to. She'd read the service manuals that floated around the biomed forums, the ones Castellan tried to get taken down. She'd spent 6 years listening to the chiller in the plant room behind the suite, the big refrigeration unit that pumped cooled water through the scanner's electronics to carry away the heat, and she knew its sounds the way you know the sounds of your own house at night. And 9 days ago, the night the machine had thrown its first fault and gone dark, she'd been in the building late, and she'd heard the chiller change its note. She'd told the charge nurse. She'd written it in the log. Chiller pitch changed approx 2140, recommend inspection. And then Castellan had been called, and the bright line had come down, and her note had gone into a folder. And 9 days later, a man in good shoes was quoting $500,000 for a gradient coil, while a number on his screen said the water wasn't carrying the heat away. She caught Dr. Shaw in the corridor after Foley left, by the vending machines that only took exact change. "Can I ask you something that's none of my business?" Maggie said. Naomi Shaw was tired in the specific way of a doctor who can't do the one thing her patients need. She was maybe 50, no nonsense, the sort who'd come to a rural county on purpose and stayed on purpose, which made her rarer than the machine. "You're going to anyway," she said, not unkindly. "That number he showed Sharon, the fault. Did he show you the actual data, or just the conclusion?" "The conclusion," Shaw frowned. "He said the gradient chain. Why?" "Because a dying gradient coil and an overheating gradient amplifier look identical from the fault codes if you don't look at why it's overheating. Maggie kept her voice low and even. She'd practiced sounding like she wasn't accusing anyone of anything, because the second a woman in a work shirt sounds like she's accusing a company man of something, she becomes the problem. An amplifier overheats for two reasons. Either it's failing, that's the $500,000 reason, or the thing that's supposed to cool it stopped cooling it. That's the chiller. And I heard the chiller change pitch the night this started. It's in the log. He didn't ask about the chiller. He didn't even go in the plant room. Shaw studied her. You're the biomed. I'm the biomed. And you can't look inside it because of the contract. I can't look inside it because of the contract. Maggie almost smiled. But the chiller's mine. The chiller's not Castellan's equipment. It's plant. It's mine to service. And nobody's looked at it in 9 days because everybody's been staring at the expensive thing it feeds. Shaw was quiet a moment. A nurse went by with a med cart. Somewhere a monitor was alarming and being silenced. If you're right, Shaw said slowly, and they put us into a $20 million lease because nobody checked a chiller. I didn't say I'm right. Maggie meant it. Certainty was a thing she'd watched get good engineers killed. I said nobody looked. Those are different. I want to look, that's all. I want permission to look at the one part of this that's actually mine. But permission was not forthcoming. Sharon Vogel listened to the whole thing in her office the next morning with her hands folded and her expression carefully neutral. And when Maggie finished, she said the words that Maggie would remember for a long time afterward, not because they were cruel, but because they were so reasonable. I appreciate your initiative, Sharon said. I do, but Maggie, the contract is very clear, and I cannot have you anywhere near that machine. If you touch it and something goes wrong, we void a contract that's the only thing standing between this hospital and a liability we can't survive. Castellan are the experts. They built it. They have the diagnostics. With respect, you maintain our infusion pumps. This is a $6 million superconducting magnet. I'm not asking to touch the magnet. I'm asking to look at the chiller, which is plant equipment, which is literally in my job description, which feeds the machine and which Castellan will say we interfered with the moment anything goes wrong. Sharon unfolded her hands. I've made a decision. We're going to take the replacement to the board, the lease. It's the responsible move. I know it's a lot of money, but it takes the risk off us, and frankly, the certainty is worth it. The board meets Thursday week. She softened, which was worse. I know you want to help. The best way you can help is to keep the rest of the building running while we sort this out. Okay. Maggie said okay, because there was no other word available, and went back to the rest of the building. Thursday week. 11 days. 11 more days of the only scanner for 100 miles sitting dark, while a $500,000 lie hardened into a $20 million fact. That night, after Bertie was asleep and her mother had gone home, Maggie sat at the kitchen table and did the thing she did when she couldn't fix something with her hands. She got on the forum. The forum did not have a name you'd recognize. It was a corner of the internet where biomedical equipment techs traded the knowledge the manufacturers spent fortunes trying to keep scarce. Service manuals scanned at 2 in the morning. Passwords for locked menus that the companies pretended didn't exist. The accumulated folk wisdom of people who kept 20-year-old machines alive in hospitals that couldn't afford new ones. It was, Maggie thought, the most honest place she knew, full of people who fixed things for a living and had no patience for anyone who profited from breaking them. She posted the symptoms. Castellan scanner, that generation gradient overtemp fault, chiller note change at onset, $500K gradient chain quote, and a hard push toward a managed service lease. She didn't editorialize. The people on the forum could smell editorializing. The first replies were the usual check the obvious, did you bleed the loop, what's your supply water temp? Then, around midnight, a reply from a handle she knew, AUGIEP, and Augie Pratt was not a man you ignored. Augie had spent 30 years as a field engineer for one of the big imaging companies before he retired, and he'd spent his retirement being a thorn in their side, because he'd seen the business change from the inside. He'd watched it go from "we fix your machine" to "we manage your access to your machine," and he'd hated it enough to spend his sunset years teaching strangers on the internet how to do for $20 what the companies billed 5 figures for. He typed in short, hard sentences, like a man who'd filed too many reports. That generation, the chiller pump, the impellers crack, plastic undersized, they put a bad batch in around your build year. Flow drops just enough that the gradient amp cooks under load but reads fine at idle, so their remote diagnostics see intermittent overtemp, and the script tells the rep gradient degradation. It is not the gradient. It is a $20 pump cartridge. I have seen this exact thing turned into a coil replacement at least 4 times. Look at the impeller. Maggie read it twice. Then she read it a 3rd time, with her hand over her mouth, because if Augie was right, and Augie was the kind of right that other people built their certainty on, then somewhere in the plant room behind the dark scanner was a piece of cracked plastic the size of a coffee cup lid that 12 days of experts had decided was a gradient coil. "How sure are you?" she typed. "Sure enough that if you open that pump and the impeller's whole, I'll mail you a steak dinner," Augie wrote back. "But it won't be whole. Take pictures, date them. And kid, whatever you do, document it before you fix it. Because the second it works again, they'll tell everyone it was never broken the way they said. Proof first. Fix second. I learned that the expensive way." She did not have permission. She wanted to be honest with herself about that, sitting in her truck in the hospital parking lot at 6 the next morning, before the building filled up. She had been told no clearly by her boss, and what she was about to do could cost her the $18 an hour job that paid for Bertie's shoes and her mother's gas money, and the small, fragile, hard-won stability of a life she'd rebuilt from scratch. She thought about the kid with the back injury, Jesse Carmody. She knew the name because his mother Dawn cleaned offices in the same building as Maggie's dentist, and the whole county was small enough that you knew the shape of people's troubles. 16 came off a dirt bike. The local doctor wanted an MRI to rule out something in the spine before he played ball again, or maybe before he walked right again. And the family had no money to keep driving over the pass to appointments that kept getting bumped, because the city hospital's machine was busy with the city's own. She thought about the chiller, which was hers. She thought about Augie's last line, "Proof first, fix second." Then she got out of the truck. The plant room was hers, contract or no contract. It was plant. It had her lockbox, her tools, her name on the maintenance schedule. She propped the door, photographed the chiller as it stood, photographed the date on her phone, photographed the maintenance log with her note from 9 days ago. She powered the chiller down properly, isolated the water loop, and went to the circulation pump, a squat gray housing about the size of a bread maker, and she felt it before she opened it. When she'd run it, the output pipe had been barely warmer than the input, which meant water was going in but heat wasn't coming out, which meant flow, not cooling, which meant the pump. She took the 4 bolts off the pump head. She photographed each step, and when she lifted the housing away and the impeller came into the light, she stopped and stood very still and felt something move through her that wasn't quite triumph and wasn't quite grief but was related to both. 2 of the impeller vanes had snapped clean off. A third had a stress crack running through it that you could see daylight through. The plastic was the wrong color in places, gone brittle and pale where it had flexed 10 million times against a load it was never sized for. It spun when she turned it. It spun freely and beautifully and moved almost no water at all. A $20 part. Less. She'd find out later the exact figure was $19 and change for the replacement cartridge from a refrigeration supplier 2 hours away, plus tax, plus the gas to go get it. She photographed it from 6 angles. She put the cracked impeller in a clean zip bag and labeled it with the date and the machine's serial number in permanent marker. the way she'd been taught to handle evidence in a different life. Then she put the pump back together exactly as it had been, broken, and bolted the housing shut, and powered the chiller back down, and left everything precisely as the experts had left it. Because Audrey was right. The fix was the easy part. The fix was $19.40. The hard part was going to be making sure that when the machine ran again, nobody got to say it had never really been sick. But she didn't fix it that day. That was the discipline that cost her the most and the discipline that won it. Instead, she went home and she built a file, the way she'd built repair files in the Army when a piece of equipment failed, and someone upstream needed to understand why so it wouldn't kill the next person. She laid out the photographs in order. She wrote a one-page summary in plain language, not engineer language, board member language, explaining that the machine was not dying, that the cooling system had a failed $20 component, that the failure was a known defect in that build year, and that the symptom had been misread by remote diagnostics as a $500,000 fault. Then she got back on the forum, and she asked Audrey a question that changed the whole shape of the thing. You said you've seen this turned into a coil replacement 4 times. Where? There was a long pause. Then Audrey wrote different hospitals, different states, same model, same build years, same gradient degradation script, same push to the managed service lease right after. I started keeping a list because it stopped looking like coincidence. You want the list? She wanted the list. It came as a photograph of a yellow legal pad in Audrey's careful block capitals, 12 hospitals with dates, the quote each had been given, and what each had ended up doing. 2 had paid for the gradient repair. 3 had bought new machines. 5 had gone onto the managed service lease. 2, only 2, had a stubborn biome who'd opened the chiller against the rules and found the impeller, and both of those had quietly fixed it for $20 and never made a fuss, because making a fuss got you fired and the machine was working again, so why poke it? 12 hospitals. Maggie sat looking at the legal pad on her phone screen and felt the thing she'd been carrying narrow to a fine cold point. This wasn't a man making a mistake. A man could make a mistake. This was a script. Somewhere inside Castellan, somebody had decided that the most profitable response to a $20 defect was to not publish it, to let the diagnostics keep pointing at the expensive part, and to use the panic of a dead machine to sell hospitals into 10-year leases worth 1,000 times the fix. The defect wasn't a bug in their business. It was a feature. Audrey, she typed, "Would those biomeds talk? The 2 who found it. Would the hospitals share their quotes on the record? Some might, people are scared. But you put it in front of enough of them at once and scared turns into angry. What are you planning, kid?" She looked at the calendar. 8 days to the board meeting. "I'm planning to give a man in good shoes a very bad Thursday," she wrote, and Audrey sent back a single line that she'd think about for years. "Then do it right. They will come after you, not the truth. Make sure the truth is too big to fit in the hole they dig for you." She told Naomi Shaw first, because she needed a doctor's voice in the room, and because Shaw had asked the right question by the vending machines. She showed her the photos and the zip bag and the legal pad in the radiology reading room with the door shut, and Shaw went through it slowly, the way she'd read a scan, looking for what wasn't there as much as what was. "You opened it," Shaw said, "after Vogel told you not to." "I opened the chiller, which is mine. The contract covers the scanner cabinet. It does not cover the plant room." Maggie had checked. She'd read the contract 4 times. "It's a gray line and they drew it gray on purpose, but I stayed on my side of it. I never touched the cabinet. I never touched the magnet. I looked at a pump." Shaw set the photographs down. "And you haven't fixed it?" "No." "Why not? You could have it running tomorrow. Jesse Carmody could be scanned Friday." And here was the part that had kept Maggie up 2 nights, the part she wasn't proud of and made herself say out loud anyway. "Because if I fix it quietly, they win. They'll say it was a minor secondary issue. They'll fold it into a service visit. They'll still take Sharon into that lease because the lease was never really about this machine. It's about locking in every machine for 10 years. And it'll happen again. Next county over, next build year, some other biome who doesn't have a forum and a guy like Augie. The fix is the cheap part, Dr. Shaw. The expensive part is making it undeniable in public once, so they can't keep doing it. She paused. Jesse waits 4 more days so that the next 1,000 Jesses don't get a machine ripped out from under them. I hate it, but that's the math. Shaw was quiet for a long time. Then she did something Maggie didn't expect. She pulled a sticky note off her monitor, wrote a name and a number on it, and slid it across. Gloria Mathers, she said. She's on the board. She's been on the board since before the bond issue that bought the machine. She's a retired school teacher, and she is the only one on that board who is not afraid of Sharon Vogel, because Gloria has buried 2 husbands and a son, and there is nothing left in this world that frightens her. Shaw almost smiled. She also voted against the managed service idea the first time Sharon floated it, on instinct, with no evidence. Give her evidence, and she'll be a problem for somebody. You're going to want a board member who's already a problem. Word got to Castellan, the way it does. Maggie never knew exactly how. Maybe Sharon mentioned to Foley that her biome had ideas. Maybe Foley's remote system flagged that the chiller had been powered down and back up by someone who wasn't him. But on Tuesday, 2 days before the board meeting, Grant Foley came back to Glenmore unannounced, and this time the low, steady wattage of his smile had a flicker in it. He found Maggie in the biome shop, a windowless room in the basement where she repaired the hospital's guts, and he stood in the doorway and looked at the soldering iron and the parts bins, and the laminated photo of Birdie taped to the cabinet, and he made a quick recalculation of who he was dealing with that she watched happen and pretended not to. "You've been in the chiller," he said, "not a question. It's plant equipment, it's on my schedule." She didn't look up from the infusion pump she was rebuilding. "They're a problem. There's a problem if you've been interfering with a Castellan service system. That voids." "I know what it voids. I read the contract. The contract covers the scanner electronics cabinet. The chiller's not in the cabinet and it's not Castellan equipment. It's a Thermo-King unit you don't even service. So." She set down the pump and looked at him, and she kept her voice exactly level, because she'd learned that the calmer you are the more it costs them to stay calm too. "What can I do for you, Mr. Foley?" He came in and shut the door, which was a mistake, because shutting the door told her he was worried, and worried men in good shoes are easier to read than confident ones. "Look," he said, "Maggie, I'm going to be straight with you, one technical person to another." He wasn't a technical person, she let it go. "These machines are complicated. You see one symptom and you think you've got the whole picture. I've got remote diagnostics, I've got the engineering bulletins, I've got a national support team. With respect, you've got a soldering iron and a hunch. If you go into that board meeting and you're wrong and the gradient chain stuff is real, I've seen the data, you don't just embarrass yourself. You cost this hospital the certainty it needs. You want to be the reason Glenmore loses imaging, because that's the road you're on." He softened the way Sharon had, the way they all did. "I think you're sharp. I do. Let me make a call. There might be a field engineer track at Castellan for somebody like you. Better money than this. You'd be on the right side of the machine instead of locked out of it." There it was, the offer. The hand on the lever, gentle. Come over here where it's warm and stop making trouble. She'd seen it used on better people than her. "That's generous," she said. "It's practical. Mr. Foley, can I ask you one technical question? One technical person to another." She reached into her drawer and took out the zip bag and set it on the bench between them, the cracked impeller catching the light from the lamp, 2 veins gone, the crack you could see through. She watched his eyes go to it and watched the wattage of his smile drop just for a half-second before he caught it. "If the fault is the gradient chain," she said, Then why is the pump that cools the gradient chain missing 2 blades and cracked through a third? Because I'll be honest with you. I've been doing this since I was 23, in places where if I got it wrong somebody died, and I have never once seen a gradient coil snap the vanes off its own cooling pump. Have you? He looked at the bag for a moment too long. That's a secondary issue, he said. It doesn't change the primary. It's the primary. The flow drops, the amp cooks under load, your remote system sees overtemp, and the script says gradient. I know about the script, Mr. Foley. I know it's a known defect in this build year. I know there are at least a dozen hospitals you've quoted the exact same way. She didn't raise her voice. She picked up the soldering iron and went back to the infusion pump, because nothing unsettles a man like being treated as no longer urgent. I think you should go now. I've got pumps to fix, the cheap kind. He went, but at the door he turned, and the wattage was all the way off now, and what was underneath it was not pleasant. You don't have the data, he said. You have a piece of plastic and a hunch and some message board. We have engineers and lawyers and 6 years of doing this. Be very careful what you say in a room with a court reporter's worth of liability in it, because the company will defend itself, and it will not be defending itself against you. It'll be defending itself against an $18 an hour tech who broke a contract and is now slandering a public company to cover it. He let that sit. Think about your kid in that photo before Thursday. And then he was gone, and Maggie sat in the basement with her hands flat on the bench until they stopped wanting to shake. Because the thing about a threat like that is it works a little even when you've decided it won't. She did 3 things in the 2 days that were left, and she did them the way Audrey had taught her. Proof first, and make it too big to fit in the hole they'd dig. The first thing was the impeller. She drove the 4 hours round trip to the refrigeration supplier and bought not 1 cartridge but 3, and she had the supplier's counterman, a bored kid named Devin, who perked up considerably when she explained why write and sign a note on the invoice confirming the part number, the price, $19 and change, and that it was a standard off-the-shelf component any chiller tech could fit in an hour. A $20 part with a paper trail. The second thing was the hospitals, with Audrey working the phones to people who trusted him and Naomi Shaw lending her name and her fury. 3 of the 12 hospitals on the legal pad agreed to share their quotes, not to stand up in public. They were too scared for that, but to put the paperwork in Maggie's hands. 3 quotes from 3 states, 3 different hospitals, same machine generation, same gradient degradation language almost word for word, same managed service lease pitched within the week, same $500,000 number give or take. Laid side by side, they stopped looking like the considered judgments of independent engineers and started looking like what they were, which was a form letter with the names changed. The third thing was Gloria Mathers, who turned out to be a small, fierce woman of 76 who made Maggie a cup of coffee strong enough to strip paint and listened to the whole thing without interrupting once, and then said, "They picked the wrong county," in a voice that suggested she'd been waiting a while for something worth being angry about. Gloria knew the rules of the board the way Maggie knew the rules of a circuit. She told Maggie exactly how to get the floor, exactly how long she'd have, and exactly which 2 other board members would fold the moment the numbers were in front of them in a way they couldn't pretend not to understand. "One thing," Gloria said, walking her to the door. "Vogel isn't a crook. I want you to understand that before Thursday, because if you go in there treating her like a crook, you'll lose the room. She's a frightened woman doing what frightened administrators do, which is buy certainty at any price because certainty is the thing she was hired to deliver. The crook is the company. Aim at the company." She fixed Maggie with a schoolteacher's eye. "And don't be cruel to Sharon when you win. You'll want to be. Don't. You'll need her running this place for another 10 years, and a humiliated CEO is a useless one. Beat the argument, not the woman." Maggie thought about that the whole drive home. It was, she decided, the best advice anyone had given her in years and the hardest. The board met in the hospital's largest conference room, which on a normal Thursday held a dozen people, and on this Thursday held 60, because word had gotten around the way it does in a small county, and because Naomi Shaw had quietly made sure the Carmodys knew that the meeting Thursday would decide whether the machine Jessie needed was fixed or replaced or leased into the next decade. Dawn Carmody sat in the third row with Jessie beside her, 16 and uncomfortable in a collared shirt his mother had made him wear, his back held at the careful angle of someone protecting it. Maggie tried not to look at them. It made the math harder. Foley was there with a colleague this time, a smoother and more senior man from Castellan's regional office who said little and watched everything. Sharon Vogel sat at the head of the table with a folder in front of her that Maggie knew contained the managed service lease, 10 years, $22 million, presented as the responsible, certain, defensible choice. The agenda had it as item 4, approval expected. Gloria Mathers got Maggie the floor under item 3, facilities update, which was the loophole she'd promised, and Sharon's mouth tightened when Maggie stood up, because Sharon could see what was coming and could not, procedurally, stop it. Maggie did not give a speech. She'd practiced not giving a speech. Auggie had warned her, the second you make it about you, about the wronged woman, you hand them the story they want, so she kept it about the machine. The scanner isn't dying, she said. I want to start there because everything in item 4 is built on the idea that it's dying, and it isn't. She held up the zip bag. This is the pump impeller from the chiller that cools the scanner's electronics. It came out of our machine on Friday. You can see 2 of the blades are gone and a third is cracked through. When this broke, the cooling water stopped carrying the heat away, and the electronics overheated and shut down to protect themselves. That's the whole fault. That's the 9 days of darkness. That's the $500,000 quote. She set the bag down where they could see it pass hand to hand, and it did, around the table, board members turning it over, and there is nothing in the world as persuasive as a broken thing you can hold. The replacement costs $19. Here's the invoice. The counterman signed it. Any refrigeration tech in the county can fit it in an hour. I haven't fitted it yet, and I'll tell you why in a minute, because the why matters more than the part does. The room had gone very still, the good kind of still, the kind where people are doing arithmetic. This is not Glenmore's bad luck, Maggie said. This impeller is a known defect in machines of this build year. The blades are undersized plastic and they crack. I have here the repair quotes from 3 other hospitals in 3 other states with this same machine. Same fault. Same $500,000 gradient language, you can read it. It's nearly word for word, and same offer of the same managed service lease within the same week, every time. She laid the 3 quotes on the table beside the impeller and the invoice. I'm not an engineer. I fix infusion pumps. But you don't need to be an engineer to read 3 letters that are the same letter, or to notice that the company that wrote them makes $19 when they tell you the truth and $22 million when they don't. Foley was on his feet. This is, Madam Chair, this is an unqualified employee who broke our service contract and is now making serious, defamatory accusations she cannot. She didn't break your contract, Gloria Mathers said, without raising her voice, reading from the page in front of her. I've read it twice this week. Your contract covers the scanner electronics cabinet. The chiller is plant equipment. It's even a different manufacturer. So unless you'd like to argue Mrs. Dunn isn't allowed to maintain a Thermoking unit she's maintained for 6 years, I'd sit down, young man. She'd taught middle school for 40 years. The young man landed like a ruler on a desk. Foley sat. The senior Castellan man leaned to Foley and murmured something, and Maggie watched the calculation move across his face. The same calculation she'd watched move across Foley's in the basement, but faster, because he was smarter and the room was full of witnesses, and at least one person in the back had a phone held up recording. And the math of a public company is that a lawsuit against a single mom is cheap right up until it's filmed. But it did not end with confessions. The good ones never do. Sharon Vogel did not leap up and admit she'd been wrong. She sat very still, her hand flat on the folder with the lease in it, and Maggie watched her perform the hardest thing a frightened administrator can do, which is change course in public. She didn't apologize. She asked questions, good ones, sharp ones, the questions of someone looking for a reason to stay on the road she'd chosen and slowly failing to find one. She asked Foley to explain why the chiller hadn't been checked. Foley said the remote diagnostics pointed elsewhere. She asked why the remote diagnostics pointed elsewhere if the cause was the chiller. Foley said it was complicated. She asked the senior Castellan man whether the impeller defect was known to the company. The senior man said he wasn't able to speak to specific engineering matters in this forum, which everyone in the room correctly heard as yes. And Gloria Mathers, who was not afraid of anything left in this world, said the sentence that turned the meeting. Madam Chair, I move that we table item 4 indefinitely, that we authorize Mrs. Dunn to install the $19 part this afternoon, and that we refer the matter of these 3 quotes and our own to the State Attorney General's office. Because if what's on this table is what it looks like, we are not the only county that's been robbed, and I did not bury a husband and a son in this town to sit here and watch it get robbed too. The motion carried. Not unanimously, 2 board members, the ones closest to Sharon, abstained, which was its own quiet kind of honesty, but it carried. Maggie fitted the part that afternoon. It took her 40 minutes. Naomi Shaw stood in the plant room and watched, and when the chiller came back up and ran sweet, and the scanner cycled through its startup and held its temperature flat and steady under load. No fault, no derate, just a working machine doing the thing $2 million and 6 years of a county's hope had bought it to do. Shaw put her hand against the warm cabinet and didn't say anything for a while, which Maggie understood completely. Jesse Carmody was scanned on Friday morning. The scan was clean, a bad sprain and some bruising, nothing in the cord, nothing that wouldn't heal. Dawn Carmody cried in the parking lot, the loose, unraveling cry of a mother who's been holding it together for 3 weeks, and she found Maggie afterward and didn't have words and didn't need them, and Maggie said, "He's going to be fine, that's the only part that matters," and meant it, and went back to the basement to fix the cheap kind of pumps. The consequences for Castellan came slowly, which is how real consequences come. The Attorney General's office, once it had 3 states' worth of quotes and a forum full of biomeds who'd been waiting years for someone official to ask, found the Internal Engineering Bulletin, the one that documented the impeller defect and recommended in writing that field reps not disclose it but instead follow the gradient chain service pathway, because the gradient pathway preserves replacement and managed service revenue opportunities. Augie had been right about the script. The script was a real document with a real author and a real signature, and it did not survive contact with daylight. It became, for a while, a story bigger than Glenmore, a class of hospitals, a pattern, the phrase "right to repair" in headlines next to the photograph of a cracked plastic impeller in a zip bag. Castellan settled with the hospitals rather than let the bulletin get read aloud in a courtroom, which told everyone what was in it. Grant Foley did not get fired, exactly. He got moved to a region far away and a job with no hospitals in it, which for a man like Foley was its own kind of ending. The senior man from the regional office took early retirement. The managed service program got quietly renamed and rebuilt with an outside audit attached, which is the closest a company like that ever comes to saying sorry. None of it made Maggie rich. That part she wanted to be honest about, because the story got told around the county in a way that made it sound like she'd come into money, and she hadn't. She got a raise. Sharon Vogel pushed it through herself, which was the nearest Sharon ever came to an apology, and which Maggie accepted in the spirit it was offered, because Gloria had been right that a humiliated CEO is useless and a grateful one is worth keeping. $12 more an hour. It paid for Bertie's winter coat, and a used car that didn't smell like the old one, and a steak dinner she shipped, dry ice and all, to a retired field engineer in another state who'd told her to take pictures before she fixed it. Augie called to thank her for the steak, They talked for an hour. At the end he said, "You did the hard part, not the fix. Anybody can do the fix, the waiting, sitting on a working answer for 4 days because the truth needed to be bigger than the repair. Most people can't do that. They fix it because they can't stand not to, and then nobody believes it was ever broken." He paused. "Where'd you learn that?" "A tent in Kandahar," she said. "You document the failure before you cannibalize the parts, or the next tech doesn't know what killed the last machine. I just never thought I'd be documenting the failure of a company." "Same skill," Audrey said. "Same exact skill. Find what's actually wrong, write it down so nobody can pretend otherwise, fix it for what it actually costs." He laughed, a dry rattle. "They spend millions making us think the machine's a mystery only they can read. It was never a mystery, kid. It was a pump." There's a thing Maggie tells Birdie now. When Birdie brings her something broken, which Birdie does constantly, because Birdie is 9 and has decided her mother can fix anything, and Maggie has stopped trying to talk her out of it. She doesn't tell her about Castellan. That's a story for when she's older. She tells her the small version, the version that fits a 9-year-old's hands. "When something's broken," Maggie says, "everybody wants to tell you it's the big expensive thing. Because the big expensive thing is exciting, and because the people who get paid to fix things get paid more if it's the big expensive thing. But it's almost never the big expensive thing." She turns whatever it is over, the lamp, the bike, the music box with the dancer that stopped turning. It's almost always something small that everybody walked right past because it was too cheap to be interesting. The trick isn't being smart, Bird. The trick is being willing to look at the cheap, boring, unglamorous thing that everyone else decided wasn't worth their time. That's where the answer lives, in the part nobody respects. Birdie usually isn't listening by the end. She's busy with the broken thing, her face screwed up in concentration, her small hands going where Maggie's hands go. But Maggie says it anyway, the way her father probably said things to her that she only understood years later. Because that's how the useful things get passed down, not as lessons, but as the shape of how somebody you love decides to pay attention to the world. The scanner is still running. It's 8 years old now, and the manufacturer's bulletins say it's end of life. And every few months somebody from somewhere tries to convince Glenmore County to replace it. And every time, Sharon Vogel forwards the email to Maggie Dunn with a single line, "Thoughts." And every time, Maggie walks back to the plant room and listens to the chiller, which she now services on a schedule of her own design with parts she buys herself for less than the cost of a tank of gas. And the chiller runs sweet, and the machine holds its temperature flat and steady under load. No fault, no derate, just a working machine doing the thing a whole county once voted to buy. And when the strangers ask, as they always do, how a hospital this small keeps a machine this old running so reliably when better-funded places are forever replacing theirs, Sharon tells them the truth, which she has learned to tell with something close to pride. "We've got a good biome," she says. It is the smallest possible way to describe it, and it is, Maggie thinks when she hears it repeated back to her, exactly right. The most important part in the building, the one nobody respects, the one everybody walks right past because it's too cheap to be interesting. It was never a mystery. It was a pump, and the woman who fixed it was standing in the room the whole time, waiting for somebody to finally think to ask.